Your ears are burning with the sounds of technical passion, brought to you in a co-branded Packet Pushers and Tech Field Day social media extravaganza. Here in Orlando, Florida, we gathered an astonishing group of mighty influencers capable of steering the Cisco ship of sail into a business model of our design. Yes, here at Cisco Live, we've ridden into the social media clubhouse on our unicorns to express an orgy of opinion and tell the world just what we think of the latest announcements put forth by Uncle John and his Packet minions. So, let's kick off this roundtable discussion by going around the table and introducing ourselves. I'll start. I am Ethan Banks, at EC Banks on Twitter. You know me as the host of the Packet Pushers podcast, a blogger at Network Computing, and I'm happy to be your host today. Mr. Foskett.
Hello, I'm Stephen Foskett. You may know me as the organizer of Tech Field Day, and I also have my blog.foskets.net, blog.foskett. Oh, wait, that's going around. Okay, there we go. That's enough. Is that a unicorn?
Whoa there, Mr. Unicorn. Packet minions. What the hell's that, Mr. Banks? This is Greg Farrow, blogging at etherealmind.com, and also co-host of the Packet Pushers podcast, and always on the Twitter as at etherealmind.
Daryl Clute. Excuse me. At Daryl Clute on Twitter, trying to resurrect my blog at blog.darylclute.net.
And this is Jennifer Huber. I'm on the Twitters at Jennifer Lucille, and I blog and do all kinds of weird stuff at jenniferlucille.com.
Tom Hollingsworth, the networking nerd. You may know me from my blog at networkingnerd.net, or my Twitter handle is at networkingnerd, now a proud member of the Tech Field Day and Gestalt IT family.
He's happy about that for the time being.
I'm Bob McCouch, at Bob McCouch on Twitter, and I've also been blogging lately at herdingpackets.net.
Good morning, this is Chris Wall, the roving reporter here at Cisco Live. You can find me at Chris Wall or on my blog, wallnetwork.com.
So let's kick off the discussion just by talking through some of the Cisco announcements. There were some hardware announcements that came out of Cisco Live Orlando 2013. One of them was the Nexus 7700 chassis. It's bigger front-to-back airflow, bigger in the terms of more traffic that you can push through this thing, and there was a line card that was announced along with it, the F3 line card, which is a bigger and more magical ASIC that does a whole lot of things and kind of slots in between the F2 and the M series line cards, and it looks like it's going to be priced accordingly. Opinions on that?
Well, I guess the first thing is you and I recorded a podcast with Ron Fuller where we dive into the technical details. So I'm going to swerve left around the speeds and feeds and what the guts of it is.
Agreed.
Let me just pick out a few of the interesting bits. Front-to-back airflow, which is the first thing that we haven't had for a very long time because we've always had the left-to-right airflow in the Nexus, and then we had those outrageous Panduit racks.
Right, right, to route the air through the chassis.
Blew out the back on the left. So overdue. You could be critical of Cisco and saying that in the past they made that decision, but maybe when they made that decision in the early 2000s it wasn't a big issue. And of course, once you shift the airflow, you actually have to shift the alignment of the chips around on the modules. So all of your modules on the new Nexus 7700 are not compatible. They're exactly the same silicon, but they're not physically pin compatible. You can't carry them forward. So painful for some people, not so bad for others. And good to see that Cisco is starting to accelerate the release of products. So the Nexus 7700 has often been well behind the curve in terms of speeds and feeds and port density. So this is, I can't remember exactly, is it 15 terabits or something?
I forgot, it's something
like
very large.
The numbers get outrageous,
yeah,
and you're starting to talk about 192 10-gig ports.
No,
right.
192 100-gig ports,
Sorry,
which
I meant
is
to
like
say 100.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling to me. I can't imagine anyone that would possibly need that much bandwidth right now.
And the 15 terabits was the 7010's throughput with maxed out fabric cards. It was closer to 20 with the 7018. So the 7700 is significantly higher. It was something like 90 some terabit day one.
So I've got a question for you guys, since you did some recordings with Doug Gourlay at Arista. How would you frame the 7700 versus Arista's new announcements around 100 gig? Because that's obviously the market that they want to go after. They want cheap 100 gig ports in every data center they can get. And do you see the new line cards as a way to drive costs down in a way to compete against that product line?
So I haven't seen pricing on the 7700, so we don't know if it's reassuringly expensive. Right.
Or just assuringly expensive.
I mean, if it ends up being priced in between an F2 and an M series card, that puts it in the $60,000 list ballpark for a card in that space for whatever port density we don't know, and does it come with optics we don't know. The astonishing thing about the Arista 7500E was 100 gig ports priced with optics for about was it 10 grand a port, I think, right?
10 grand a port was what was
pretty,
on the podcast.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it difference, is that for the Arista product, the unique feature there was that the optics suited for the data center, so short range, 100 gig optics, all bound in. So in the year ahead, you're going to see a lot of discussion around this thing called silicon photonics, where today we use lasers on cards, and those modules that we use to generate the signal that goes into the fiber today is a full-on laser, and that requires all the circuitry required to generate the signal, and then do the laser transduction, and then launch it into the phi layer of the fiber optic. Now that's changing, because what we're now saying is there's now silicon chips that can generate lasers without having any ruby, the traditional stuff. That absolutely and utterly changes the profile of the SFP. So instead of having what we have today with a 100 gig E port, which is a 2-inch wide, 5.5-inch long, CFP, it's going to be more like what we have today with an SFP plus, and it's not going to use the same power, and it's not going to use the same space, and that's why the Nexus 7000 in the previous generations wasn't able to get the front to back airflow, because you just couldn't get enough air across. If you figure that front plate has X number of ports in it, then there's only so many perforations, and so how much air can you suck through the front?
Right.
And so those are physical challenges as to why it was always been left to right, the chips. Now, you could be critical and say they shouldn't have chips that burn so much energy. They should have been using energy efficient chips that didn't. I mean, really, but
They should also use unicorn power.
they should, and they should use more glitter.
Yes.
More glitter.
More cowbell.
So in that sense, it's good to see. Now, the other interesting thing about the F3 module, if you're not following along at home, is that it's now collapsing many of the M1
That's right.
features and the F2 features. So we're talking about one F3 blade that's got a lot of the MPLS OTV,
Lisp,
fabric path.
Fabric path.
Yeah. Whereas today you have to do the alien.
Hardware encapsulation for a lot of different media types. So,
And that's where Cisco wants to be, is where there's not disjointed line cards moving forward. The goal with the F3 was to get it down to a single line card to do all functionality.
And there's going to be an F3 release for the 7000 series as
Yes.
well. So it's going to be joint. Yeah, you can get a new one for the 7700, and you can put an F3 in. Same card, but the slightly different form factor into the 7K.
Yep.
So, yeah.
So it's a step, but Ron talked about some of the more details on that specific show.
Yep,
It's
you
not
did.
all there yet, but they are producing new chips that run the phi layers that start to deliver all of the functions in a single card, and that's where it is.
And that's where a lot of things are going. I mean, it's smart that you mentioned the laser on the photonics in silicon. Intel is really pushing that hard. That was part of their Open Compute announcement for Facebook. They haven't delivered it yet, but I think it could even change the form factor even more dramatically than what you said. I mean, they're talking about having, fiber go directly to the chip, which is pretty amazing. And yeah, there would be a dramatic reduction in power. So that's what Thunderbolt was supposed to be originally, and probably what the next generation of, all of Intel's high-speed interconnect is going to look like.
Yeah. So another interesting demonstration that was out on the floor was that of the Virtual Internet Routing Lab, VIRL. Any of you guys see that demo? What was Jennifer? You're nodding. What was your impression of it?
Well, I probably took some baby steps and looked at the first virtual switch, the one that you can get with the single license for free for a single CPU. Because I didn't know that something like that existed, because I live in wireless space. So I've been dealing with wireless controllers that have been virtualized. So I don't know that I can contribute a whole lot, except I'm going to go get that single CPU switch for the house and start tinkering with it, see what it's all about. Because I'm fully unprepared for that realization that virtual switches and routers are here, and I need to know how to virtually connect my virtual controllers into a virtual switch.
So the VIRL, who else maybe saw the demo? They had one.
I'm going right after we.
Yeah, there's one in the Cisco Learning Lab, and there's one that was out back, in the different section of the world, the solutions floor. And the idea behind this thing is to give you the opportunity to model your network, soup to nuts, with actual operating systems running. And you can, you can create a model of your infrastructure and then do lab testing. You can do, theory testing. What if I do this? And there's router models and switch models, and you can plumb them all together and create a topology and run all the protocols just like you would in real life, only it's all virtualized.
And it's actually running the same binaries, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have code-dependent issues.
There's an NXOS one. There's iOS XR, I believe. I didn't get
iOS and iOS XE as well.
Yeah.
So this is interesting why it's coming out. There are just multiple reasons why, and the reasons why there's going to be free as well. So it's coming out to support 1PK development. It's coming out to address, as someone posted earlier, GNS3 and Dynamips and stuff, and to be able to support doing labbed changes to your environment. The reason that I see them going free, the biggest issues are the 1PK and the 1PK development, because it's a development environment. They want it to be an open environment, so you have to give it away free. You can't expect people to pay for that to develop against it. Then the addressing Dynamips and GNS3, you can't compete with free without being free.
Yeah. What do they do so that you can't run it in production?
Throughput limitations.
How is it crippled?
I believe that very similar to the CSR 1000V, there's a throughput limitation for the free one. So you can test against it and do light traffic loads. Like the CSR 1000V is limited to 2.5 megabits per second with a free license. I think that that's great that Cisco's going to want to do something with VIRL. Two things. One, they really have to find a way to integrate it with Keratin and some of the modeling tools that we've seen at previous tech field days, where you can load up a virtual topology into your VIRL and it auto builds everything for you, because I'm going to need all these extra switches.
Well, there is some of that. So I spent about 15 minutes talking to Bruce Pinsky in the Cisco Learning Lab, and he showed this product off. So there's going to be three flavors of this thing, as he explained it to me. One, you can load it all up on your machine. If you get a machine with enough memory and horsepower to run this thing, you can throw some VMDKs and make that go. Then there's going to be, go ahead.
That's actually the second point that I wanted to make, just to jump in, because you said the exact words. The problem with the CSR 1000V right now is that while it is a free product for a certain amount of throughput, you basically have to be running a server to boot it. It requires a ridiculous amount of vCPU, a ridiculous amount of RAM that never gets used. All it does is it checks it at boot time.
So actually a quick update on that. One of the sessions I was in this week, I found out that the 3.10 release of the CSR 1000V, which is slated for July of 2013, will go down to a requirement of 1 vCPU and 2.5 gigs of RAM, which is still not as lightweight as...
But at least it's laptop capable.
It's a decent laptop.
Yeah.
You could pull off a couple of them at least.
And it's lighter than a Windows VM. So
but that's not the only way you can run this thing.
Let's just jump into the practical discussions of that. As somebody who's building software-based networks, or using the CSR, if you have a real live network and you've got today's CSR, I have to allocate 4 vCPUs and 32 gigs of memory, I think, is the minimum. It's either 32 or 64, some vast amount of memory.
Well, no, it needs the current release, I think, needs 4 gigs of RAM.
4 gigs of RAM.
Yeah.
I thought it was more than that. Anyway.
No, 4 vCPUs, I think.
It depends on the throughput, I believe.
Yeah. And so if I've got to have 2 of them in HA, I have to find 2 machines. And now all of a sudden I've got a fat VM HA problem in my DRS cluster, because finding 4 vCPUs is a bit of a hassle.
Right.
So they have to fix that to scale that down.
Right. Yeah. So it sounds like they're making a good step with that.
Yep.
And they're planning to. It sounded like they're going to continue to try to optimize and bring those requirements down.
Now there's a couple of other things around that as well. Is one of the things around CSO is it's painful licensing at the moment. You have to buy it, and the pricing is not is distorted compared to what the value of their competitors is as well. So we had a silent briefing, so I can't speak too much about it, but there's something happening around the iOS software licensing space. There's lots of different, there's more than one initiative, to be fair, to improve software licensing, it seems, and I'm not sure which one's Cisco's going to select as they go forward. Maybe it'll select all of them, it's hard to tell.
Well, the one thing I was pleased to hear, I don't have anybody using the CSR in production yet, any of my customers. I do have it in mind for a couple, but the presenter did say that 2.5 megabit premium fully featured license is going to remain in. I had some concerns that maybe that was going to get worked out at some point, but they specifically said for lab purposes or for proof of concept type stuff that will remain a perpetually available operating mode. So after like the 60-day trial or whatever, it'll just drop down to 2.5 megabit, but full feature, so you can theoretically build a lab with it.
Well, then that's what they're doing with the Nexus 1000V too, right? They went to a freemium model like VMware, and it makes sense with going to the multiple hypervisor support. when you're going to be supporting other products where people aren't paying licensing for that specific feature. So to be able to run the hypervisor, whereas with VMware you have to have the Enterprise Plus license because that's the only place they support the distributed virtual switch.
Yeah.
So one other point to make on this is we've been talking about this in the context of, like GNS3, we want to be able to run this VIRL product on our laptop self-contained and all that. But if you're doing a bigger install, there are other options. There's going to be a cloud option where you can, via the cloud and web interface, do all of this, and it'll be stored in a database backend in Cisco's world. And there's going to be an appliance model. You can buy an appliance that'll do this, and you can license that, and so on and so forth. And Bruce Pinsky made the point that there's a common database backend for this if you're going to use the cloud model or the appliance model, where you can save topologies and save configurations all in a common database and look at it in multiple different interfaces and have it presented. So, for example, if you're a training provider and you're building up a classroom, you can have all your mock labs and so on built all in the background, and then just press a button and have it go and present that out to your class. In a saved and automated way. So there's a lot of options that they're building around this, and it's pretty clear looking at the interface. There's a lot of thought that's gone into it, and it's going to be a pretty meaningful product. Yeah, of course, we're worried about the free version, but
yeah. Now that's huge. Though. I mean, I'm somebody that I don't have access to an enormous lab of equipment all the time, so I use, GNS3 and that kind of thing quite regularly for testing out changes, mocking up, change scripts, that kind of thing for my customers. So to have a means to do that with current and ongoing software in the future and all that kind of thing, that's going to be great. Now, is there any word on switching with that? Is it going to support any switching type images? I understand, of course, it doesn't have the hardware.
It's got a titanium image, NXOS, so yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Now, by the way, we've also been talking about a free version as if that was officially announced. I don't think it was officially announced. The only official thing I got was pricing and licensing to be determined, and that's all I got. So, did anybody...
Arnold went to work for Cisco.
I heard. I wasn't in the session, but it came up in one of the sessions on Sunday, I believe, that VIRL will be available in a freemium model, like the Nexus 1000V and the CRS 1000V, CSR 1000V. So I'm not sure. I can't confirm it, but I heard people that were in. I believe it was the CCIE update. The route switch update.
Yeah, it seems to be the prevailing rumor.
And I have to imagine that that's one of the reasons they've come up with this. Is probably related to the swirling rumors of the CCIE version 5 going virtual even for the config section.
On the plus side, 5 years too late. Sorry, on the negative side, 5 years too late. Should have been out 5 years ago. We've been asking for it for a decade. On the positive side, okay, it's here.
Yeah, right? And it looks like it's going to be good.
Point out that although we've got something that's very exciting, the flip side of that potential discussion is just how long does it take for vendors to recognise that there's a genuine need for building skills and competency around these types of things. And in an SDN world, as we go forward, where we start talking about managing, we need to be able to have testing systems to test against for this type of orchestration automation. And this is also, not only does VIRL matter in terms of, learning how to create routers and do OSPF and QoS configurations and trial them before you go live, but it also very much matters in terms of building up system automation tools and validating them before you deploy them in your production. Keep two sides to this.
Yep. So that's a really good segue into another topic here. I think maybe one of the more understated announcements was that of Nexus Validation Test, the program Cisco's created internally, where before they're going to release NXOS code, they are going to put it through a real-world series of tests, a whole battery. I think Ron Fuller told us 230 tests that have been established already, and they're going to be working on a whole lot more, where before NXOS is released to the public, they are going to build up a customer-like environment, put the code through all of these tests, and then when all the bugs that they can find have been worked out, they'll finally release it. So now maybe, in a way, I kind of thought they were doing that, but that's really not the way software validation works, I guess, in a traditional QA environment. It's not really part of the normal structure is to emulate a customer environment and go. It's a different sort of an animal. So this is actually a really significant step that Cisco's taking here.
Well, I find that interesting because I know that there's lots of VARs or what have you that do beta testing for controller code, where we actually have to have access points up and have clients send data, because there's no way, I guess, to do virtual RF PHY layer. So I think it's interesting that they're taking, it seems like from what I already do and other people that I know do, help them validate their code and find bugs for them, that they're now doing that for I thought that they did that too. And for everything. That's,
Ethan and Greg, you guys have been probably some of the biggest detractors from the Nexus OS development cycle. I know Greg has voiced his opinion repeatedly about desk checking the code, and Ethan, you've had your fair share of issues with safe harbor code and things like that on some other Cisco
on the Catalyst side
devices.
for sure, yeah.
So do you think that they're only going to desk check safe harbor releases? Are they going to desk check every release?
Safe harbor's dead.
Because
they told us safe harbor's dead.
That means that's going to have to slow down the development cycle if we're going to have to make sure that it's burned in every time. So
and we're already seeing that with NXOS 6.2 on the 7Ks. It was supposed to be released last quarter, by the end of last quarter, and we're not going to be seeing it until next month.
I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
All right, because we've had enough features.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've had enough features. We've got mostly, excuse me, there's everything that we need is pretty much there, right? And if there's a couple of customers out there, we're at the point of the code base where if you're a big enough customer and you're threatening to spend enough money and you want a specific feature in the code, Cisco's going to put that in for you. Well, don't cause me pain just because there's some customer who's big enough to do that for me. So I think that it really is time for Cisco to move away from the ship early, ship off, and ship shit debate, right? And then let us find the bugs. And they need to focus internally on the quality. And that's my point is I'm experiencing repeatedly at customer sites bug after bug after bug, hassle after hassle after hassle. And these things sit at the core of my networks, and I lose face with my CIO. And then my CIO stops investing in the network, and then I'm no longer able to bring services to the table, and Cisco gets smeared all over the discussion internally. And now that extends over into the UCS, that extends into vBlocks, that extends into network management. How can you trust a company that can't build a core switch when every discussion you have is, I can't upgrade the line cards because now I have to do a microcode update? You know, all those things cascade into, you know, how much frustration have you been in a meeting when you say, I need to do a network update, and they say, it's too risky.
Cisco positions the Nexus product line for the core of your network, for the mission-critical business, high-throughput, that part of your network where it can't break, it's got to stay up all the time, which implies then that the NXOS they expect you to run on it is rock solid and pretty awesome right out of the gate, and that it's a safe thing for you to do to upgrade to that new version to get that new feature, and that you're not having to do minor upgrades along the way just to get to a stable version of code. So this, to me, is huge. It's absolutely huge. They're really trying to build customer trust back up, which they've lost over the years.
Yeah, it is huge because I'm kind of tired of having to ask on Twitter if version X is a problem, and can
we
I
all
get
do
to it?
that.
Right?
It's like Twitter is part of our bug scrub process.
Absolutely. It is.
for the wireless
And that's
controller
not
Some
code.
other poor guy tried it first, right?
And that's not confidence building either, right?
No, it's not.
No.
But for the wireless controller code, there's still a SureWave validated versions of controller code. There's releases in between, but I always go through the open and closed caveats and see what's out there, and do I need to upgrade?
Sure.
Because because there's a SureWave, I mean, I could be ahead of that, but I probably don't want to roll back.
Yeah, but I mean,
so they're
reading
doing
open
away
and
with
closed
the
caveats has about as much fun as slapping your face with
I
a
know,
salmon.
but it
Especially
saved
with
me.
how
It
long
saved
they're
me a
getting
couple
nowadays.
of times finding something specific that was going to bite me that was still an open caveat.
So, kudos to Cisco for exposing the caveats and telling us whether they're open and
but
closed, so we
it's-
know what's happening and why
It's
they're
10
happening.
paragraphs worth of stuff.
I once, for a code update, I spent 4 days going through the caveats. I had to go into a spreadsheet, I had to list every caveat, and I had to rate a risk against it, and then I had to research each one of those bug IDs. That's 4 days of my life I ain't getting back.
I know.
Yeah.
And I'm not happy about it.
So they're not doing the SureWave, or you called it, what was the word that you used for the switch code?
Safe harbor.
Safe harbor? They don't
That-
use
that's
for
in the
controller
Catalyst
code.
product
So they're doing
line.
away with the safe harbor and changing their testing processes to be more like
That's what
customer
we
beta
understand.
testing.
Yeah, Safe Harbor for years was the code that you were supposed to run if you were in a very high uptime environment.
Got
If it's
it.
been Safe Harbor approved,
Okay.
therefore you were supposed to be able to trust it. And over the years, it just turned into kind of, I can't trust this either, because
Yeah.
you'd run the Safe Harbor
Yeah.
release and find a memory leak or find
Yeah.
some kind of an annoying bug that would impact your
No,
environment.
it was supposed to be the code that they didn't tweak, that they put it out there and ran it for months until it didn't break, and invariably somebody would tweak it.
And then
Yeah.
Safe Harbor was also very late to, in
Okay.
other words, when the code was released, Safe Harbor wouldn't bless it for weeks or potentially months
yeah.
afterwards,
Oh,
because
yeah.
they wouldn't begin to certify it
Yeah.
until after it had been
Same
released
thing
and was
with
out
the
there.
Sure,
But
yeah.
So-
it still was the model of ship early, ship fast,
Oh,
ship
yeah.
rubbish.
Yeah.
and then like for customer feedback, the TAC will pick it up.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is
And that's not a
safe
good way
harbor
to
was
run
you
your-
ship a version of code, and if after a year the bug rate drops below a certain level, in other words, the customers aren't finding any bugs, or internally they're not finding any bugs, it must be safe.
It's a maintenance release. Hooray! We've arrived.
So that's not brilliant either.
No,
so
it's not.
the way that Ron described about Nexus validation testing is they're building real live lab scenarios. They take the code that the devs propose to ship and bring it into this lab and run an automated test suite.
I think we can fix this problem by going back to the dev team with a ruler, and every time they write bad code, we slap them on the knuckles.
I think this might be a step. But anyway, it seems to be, so the way Ron described it, he said, we bring it into the lab, into the NVT suite, we test it, and if it fails, we send it back. And that's where the delays may be coming from.
And
I
he
could
said the
speculate.
process is really working well because he described a scenario where they built up this mock customer environment and they couldn't even complete the battery of tests because it blew up partway through. Stuff like that, just trying
That's
to
good.
emulate a normal customer environment. So it was really encouraging to hear that they're getting
They're
bugs.
blowing it up in
They're-
testing instead of blowing it up in production.
Yeah, they're blowing it up. Although the developers are going, I got to fix all this? Yeah, we ain't
Yeah.
releasing it till you fix it. Oh, so this is a cultural change for Cisco internally
That's
as
interesting.
well.
It must be
Yes.
cultural for the
Yeah.
route switch team,
Yeah.
and more so than the controller.
When are we going to see that for Cisco UCS? Cough.
Yeah, it'll happen.
Okay, which
People have
actually
to
brings up
scream
an
enough.
interesting point. This isn't going to be limited to NXOS releases. This is supposedly, this process is going to go into iOS as well. I don't have any more details on that other than it was mentioned. This process is going into other software trains. So
And I wonder if that ties in with the whole controllers being on the switches now. Like maybe the two BU units are having to like shake hands and make friends instead of that's not my problem.
Well,
Especially now that it is iOS
Yeah,
XE
yeah,
and not
yeah.
the
Airspace, yeah, yeah.
OS.
Well, I
anymore.
think, Ethan, to your point, the reason why they can do that is Nexus is a pretty small product line. I mean, that OS only runs on 4 or 5 different kinds of switches, whereas iOS runs on everything: toasters, routers, switches.
Not quite. Well, there's different versions of iOS.
Right, but it's so huge you can't possibly implement a program like that until you make it bulletproof with a smaller product line first.
Yeah.
But does any company really do a good job with this kind of testing? I mean, seriously? Because the only company that I ever installed without worrying about was Data General Unix way back in the 90s. And everything else, you always worry about bugs.
So here's a buggy platform that we've all been dealing with for a long time, I bet, around this table, which is the Catalyst 6500 and its monolithic iOS. Well, now the successor to the 6500 has been announced, the Catalyst 6800. It's a little bit of a stretch to call it a successor. It's kind of an evolution of the Catalyst 6500. Did any of you guys get a look at the new products, and what do you think?
So my thought on that is I find it interesting that they decided to do a chassis, a rip and replace chassis upgrade, because I mean every time a customer has to do that, that's an opportunity for a competitor or something else to work in. So I know that they were kind of at the limits of the 6500E chassis, but I'm wondering what kind of risk this opens in terms of replacing the chassis. You're giving me an interesting smirk there.
It's a positioning exercise for Cisco to start off with. So, I whined about this in network computing a little bit. Like, did we really need another line of switches? Come on, we got a lot of switches here, Cisco, and enough is enough. But when we got the press briefing on the 6800, the point that Cisco made is they have shipped 800,000 Catalyst 6500s. They got a huge install base out there, and they have customers that want to protect that investment, and they also have customers with very well-defined operations where they don't want to have to change everything they do because they've done a rip and replace and dropped in Nexus, let's say, with a different operating system and different code and different features, and have to think. They don't want to think about those things. They want to say, my 6500, it's got one problem, and the one problem is it doesn't have enough bandwidth. I can't throw enough 10 gig ports in this thing, or 40 gig ports as the case may be, or 100 gig. I need something else I can go to, but yet keep everything else the same. Thus, the 6800. That seems to be how they're positioning this. So, for me, I see it wasn't so hard for me to change over to Nexus. Like, yeah, it's just different command line, whatever.
Well, I know there's certain parts of the large government institutions. I know certain military installations. I've heard stories of them using the Catalyst. And when you're certifying them to run, military equipment, submarines, that type of stuff, they don't want to change because that means going back. And I once worked on a nuclear reactor where they wouldn't allow any wireless networking because they'd only certified the reactor up to 1 gigahertz. Because when it was built in the 1950s, we didn't have any wireless above 1 gigahertz. Right? And that's the sort of mentality. It's perfectly rational in a dumb kind of a way. But, you know, so if you can go and give them, this is your 6500, we've just, you know, put a better carburetor on it and a couple of extra cylinders and it'll let yourself go. But it's still the same thing, and sort of make that, don't look too hard just because it's all new silicon and new power supplies and new chassis, but it's still the same old. Well, it's not really, is it?
Well, I mean, there was one new thing that I thought was interesting that they announced along the 6800 lines, which is the 6800 IA, the fixed config switch, 48 port 10100 1000 with, was it 2 or 4 10 gig backhaul to the Catalyst 6807 XL. And what the IA stands for instant access, and it's supposed to be a zero-touch config. You plug the switch in, and it shows up. All configured, kind of like a remote line card, only it isn't. It's kind of like a FEX, like, but it's not. Almost, it still does local switching and all that, as I understand it. And they described it as a distributed stack when they gave us the press briefing on it. Is that interesting to you guys?
How many of those are supported per chassis?
20 right now is the number. They said they want, out of the gate, they wanted to support about 1,000 ports per core switch that they were plumbed up to.
So the IA becomes a top of rack solution, tying back to the 6800 as an end of row and a really small.
It's not a data center play. It's not a data center play from their positioning. Whether you could use it for that or not is a different question. But they're positioning it as a campus play, and they're saying we see this for small IT shops who don't have a lot of people on board and just want one point of management to manage a whole lot of ports. So they can take 20 of these things, scatter them around anywhere off of 10 gig uplinks, and manage them from that one core switch. So, Tom, you're looking unimpressed.
I'm laughing. No, I'm not unimpressed. I'm just afraid because, you know, before I went to work for Steven, I worked a lot with schools, and ubiquitous 10 gig fiber doesn't exist in a school district.
No.
Yeah,
of course it doesn't.
Fiber doesn't ubiquitously exist in a school district. So it's great.
Copper doesn't ubiquitously.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that we want to think that, you know, we can distribute these across campuses and things like that, but we're still going to have to rip and replace cable plant to make that happen. And while the cable plant people are going to be really excited about all that because that's extra revenue for them, I mean, you're going to run into people that are like, that's awesome. Can we make the old stuff run for another year?
Yeah. Yep. I got the opinion that product might be a special order. So, it's one of these big customers wants a specific thing. Yeah. They're buying enough of them to turn it into a product line and see if somebody else wants to buy it. Yeah. I sort of saw this as like so one of the things I've sort of realized being at this show this time and getting across a few more topics than I normally do and seeing some different perspectives is that Cisco is its own merchant silicon manufacturer. Yeah. And one of the things that became clear from some of the research I've done is that Cisco's now saying in different BUs they own their silicon and they reuse it across there. Now, if you figure that Cisco's shipping $20 billion a year and owns 75% of the marketplace, well, they're as big as all the other merchant silicon people put together.
The Broadcoms
the Marvels. Now, I might be off, and maybe there's some numbers. I'm no analyst, but Cisco can be their own silicon provider if they're their own merchant silicon internally. Yeah. So that, you know,
but just by default because of the huge volume that they ship.
Yes. Yeah. So if you look at the chipset in the C3850 for the converged wired and wireless stuff, they've now taken that chip and put it onto the supervisor in the 4500E.
The SUP
880.
80. Yeah, 80. Yeah.
8 Echo.
Yes.
E for Echo. And that is sort of like saying, well, we have merchant silicon, we're going to use it across our line of all that sort of thing.
It's just that the only merchant or the only people that buy from them is internal Cisco BUs. They don't sell to the public.
Yeah, and certainly I was fortunate enough to be able to attend the NetVet, and John Chambers was talking directly to the assembled, to the true believers, and that was a big point that he was trying to make there, is that silicon remains the future. And any way you look at it, any network has assets, has hard assets in it, and they're going to be capital intensive assets. Just because you go and buy a OEM server doesn't mean that it's still not $2,000 for an OEM server compared to, say, $4,000 for a branded server, and that's still capital intensive comparatively.
He's mentioned the NetVet session with Uncle John, and that Silicon's the future in his world. He kind of took a poke at VMware too, didn't he?
He did, and that was a really interesting. He sort of made comments along the lines of, I haven't got my notes with me, but he said that I took it personally when VMware bought Nicira. They knew we were going after Nicira, and I partner with my, the companies that we partner with for life. We don't go and hurt each other. We don't attack each other. And I definitely regard the VMware relationship as tactical, no longer as strategic. That's his exact words.
That was what he said.
Wow.
Right? Now, that is a significant shift for that. And I wonder just what the ramifications of that are. Now, VMware is and remains a big partner for Cisco. Nexus 1000V, VCE, all those initiatives. But if your CEO and somebody like John Chambers, who contains very tight control over his business unit, that harbours major changes for what the network, what the infrastructure stack looks like in the years to come.
Yep. And that's interesting because I think a lot of that kind of animosity was already kind of known. It's been the rumor mill. I had not obviously attended that session or with the NetVets, but it's nice to get validation that that really is kind of the feeling. And having some information behind the scenes that I won't go into, I think it will be interesting to see at the VMworld conference with NSX and all the relationship around, okay, we bought Nicira, we baked it for a year or so, how is that going to play into the space? And ultimately, moving even beyond just Cisco and VMware, I think VMware has begun going down that road of kind of pissing off partners and stepping on toes more and more, that kind of let's be frenemies with different partners that we work with, and even resellers and VARs has kind of begun to kind of snowball a little bit. So yeah, it is interesting sitting kind of more on the VMware side of things. Definitely as a VCDX and a partner with VMware, it is interesting and somewhat dismaying to see them kind of shooting different people's feet and slapping faces just to kind of gain market share, I think, in cloud environments, things like that. So.
Well, it doesn't necessarily mean destruction of the Cisco VMware relationship, though. I had a very similar conversation with NetApp yesterday here at the show as well, about Microsoft, and Microsoft absolutely competes with their partners. Cisco is coming to see that VMware is also going to compete with Cisco, as well as cooperate with Cisco. So even though I'm sure that John is hurt by Nicira, I would not be at all surprised if we see a really tight relationship continuing with VMware, along with some pot shots and competition.
Sure, but if you look historically, we all know that VMware is under the umbrella of the EMC Corporation, and they've always done a good job at, we're going to provide good enough features, but not directly compete with the mothership or our really tight partners. And this is where we start to see things like the vCloud hybrid service that came out. We're directly kind of competing with the people that we want to power, public cloud with our product. We're also going to provide our own cloud using our own product. And no matter how you slice it or try to do the marketing around it, that's ways where they're partnering with people and also competing with them at the same time. I think that is somewhat dismaying to me, because you can't have your cake and eat it too.
And I saw the same thing with the MDM vendors, where they've historically said that we're not going to compete with MDM. We're partnering with good technologies and Mobile Iron and blah, blah, blah. There's a few big partners that they do MDM solutions with, but we saw a demonstration over at one of their booths where they have a Cisco-branded MDM solution that's in direct competition to the people that they're partnering with. And the lady that was doing the demonstration kind of danced around the questions that we were asking until we asked the right question, and then she told us she was a cop, basically. So it was really interesting to see where they didn't want to come right out and say, hey, this is our Cisco MDM solution. Basically, they've OEM'd somebody else's stuff that's in direct competition to 4 booths over, where all the MDM people are operating.
And
it's
even
interesting.
Even another example, like the 1000V for the longest time was just for VMware, and finally they did release a version for Hyper-V. So
finally.
So maybe that's even an example where it's going the other way around. I mean, obviously Cisco has to maintain a leverage, or has to leverage the fact that they want to be relevant in all hypervisors when possible. But that's another way where it's, this exclusive advantage that vSphere always had by being able to use the 1000V was taken away.
Microsoft has arrived.
I won't argue that. I won't argue that.
Okay, so just one point about that. VMware has their strategy, but it only works for VMware and for KVM. I'm not entirely sure that VMware is ever going to have a switch that works for Hyper-V. It might be possible, but it might be years down the track before it turns out. The other side of this is that Cisco remains the only player today that can connect Hyper-V and KVM, so Cloud Stack, OpenStack and VMware networks together. So that and then many enterprises do actually have an OpenStack and have a VMware today. Most of their dev work is done on an OpenStack, and most of the production loads are held on VMware. And then you have legacy. So you still have all of your bare metal, you still have your existing networks. And Cisco's going to be the only solution that can bring those three requirements, those three networking, and they're different networks. You're going to have a VMware type of network, you're going to have a Microsoft network, and you have to integrate with the virtualization managers above them, and then you're still going to have your legacy. Cisco's still the only vendor who can give you that today. And they've got a good solution for that around the where the Nexus 1000V is in, the hypervisors, and then they've got legacy stuff, integration plays at work to integrate the physical network to the Nexus 1000V. That's not going to change. The question is, in my mind, does Cisco go after Citrix and buy them and go against head-to-head with VMware?
Now that would be cool.
Now that would be cool.
But if memory serves, Citrix already kind of bailed on Zen Server. I don't think they're moving forward with that product. I think they've given it away. So it would be higher at the stack. We're talking Zen App
So there's plenty of people taking OpenStack and commercializing it. There's plenty of people. So Cisco's OpenStack, IBM's OpenStack, HP's OpenStack, Dell's
Red Hat.
That's great, but they've kind of even given up on their own product. I mean, it's a matter of faith, in my opinion.
Yeah, but
even they don't really.
Sure, but they
want
could.
To move forward.
Cisco could buy, and there's a lot of tie-ups. If Cisco needs to move up and out of the network and into the application space, where are they going to go? You can't buy Microsoft. You can't buy VMware because even though the share price is dropping.
And I think Citrix has a long history of being quite exceptional at the end-user experience, application virtualization, presentation of applications.
Yeah, you could buy the end-user compute and say there's profitability there, and then see what
even
you
just
can do
the
with
ZenPrize acquisition, having that in your portfolio would also be pretty powerful. So it would be a dangerous threat if they did have.
It'd be an interesting, it's pure scuttlebutt. I'm just pointing at it.
Don't buy their stock based on this podcast.
Well, I think that's a good place for us to wrap up this Cisco Live Orlando 2013 Roundtable. None of us work for Cisco. We are just all independent folks with our Twitter handles and our blogs doing what we do best. Talk like we know what we're talking about. All right. Tell you what, let's go around the table one more time. Plug your handles, plug your blogs, and then we'll close the show out, starting with Mr. Foskett.
All right. So once again, this is Stephen Foskett. I'm sfoskett on Twitter. You can find me at blog.fosketts.net or at Tech Field Day. And I want to give a shout out to the fact that we're going to do we have a software-defined data center symposium on September 10th in Silicon Valley, and people are invited to attend that live and meet some of these PacketPushers folks there. And then we also have Networking Field Day coming up the day after in September 11th through 13th.
Cool. So I'll be there then. And just before I saddle up on my unicorn, one last thing. Cisco's projecting 10% growth in its services business in the next 12 months. Against a hardware growth of less than 3%. So if you're a reseller, start getting ready to sell Cisco services one way or the other. So I'm Greg Farrow. You can find me on my blog at etherealmind.com. On the Twitters is at etherealmind, and I'll look forward to saddling up again in a week or so with Mr. Banks and ride the PacketPushers podcast around the virtual boardroom.
Yeah.
And this is Daryl Clute at Daryl Clute on Twitter and blog.darylclute.net.
And this is Jennifer Huber at Jennifer Lucille and blogging at jenniferlucille.com.
Tom Hollingsworth. You can find me at networkingnerd.net. My Twitter handle is networkingnerd, and you can also find some of my stuff at gestaltit.com.
Chris Wall. I'm at Chris Wall on the Twitterverse, and my blog is wallnetwork.com.
Bob McCouch had to step out because he had another appointment to go attend because he's a very busy and in-demand person. You can follow him on Twitter at Bob McCouch. And I am Ethan Banks at EC Banks on Twitter. My blog is up at Network Computing, and I also show up on PacketPushers.net from time to time. And, of course, this is a co-branded show with Tech Field Day. So Tech Field Day, I think it's going to hit the video stream, Stephen?
Absolutely. TechFieldDay.com.
And so if you are listening to this on the PacketPushers audio feed and you want to see our ugly faces, well then, techfieldday.com and get a look at this session that we filmed here.
Face for podcasting.
Yeah, faces made for podcasting.
And special shout out to Hans Delin here for helping out with the video here.
Yes.
Thank you, Hans. Yay! And
We sound so enthusiastic.
You didn't help out a lot.
It's the last day of the conference.
I should point out that Jennifer Huber is here, and her face is in fact made for video. So. Packet Pushers home base is packetpushers.net. You can follow our show and all the content that is generated by our podcast and by the community blog at Packet Pushers. If you have any questions about this show, packetpushers@gmail.com.
And also get over to techfieldday.com to check out the stuff there, and Gestalt IT, where they're starting to build a community there. It's wider than just networking. It also includes server people and storage people.
Not just plumbing.
And from the Packet Pushers crowd, remember that.
Too
much networking would never be enough.
And storage.